Hello? Oh, I mean, hello. It's just me this week. I'm Bret. This is my channel. And we're going to hang out for a little bit and talk about containers, cloud native, everything I'm working on. I am in Portland, Oregon this week, visiting friends, having some business meetings, and we should still do this. So I bring this kit with me wherever I go. If you're here in January and February, I did, I think, 1 or 2 weeks from Florida. Was there for a conference. And later this year, I'll be probably at some more conferences and do this again. So it's kind of a traveling roadshow of cloud native. I'm glad you're here. If you are not watching this live, this happens every Thursday. Thursdays at US Eastern 1 p.m. And yes, daylight savings time does change twice a year so that everybody's confused when I change that. But other than that, it's consistent. Been doing this for 5+ years. So if you didn't know, there's a lot going on here. All the links are below to the podcast that comes from this with my guests. In a minute, I'll tell you about all the guests that are going to be coming up because we've got some exciting ones. And every other week we have a guest, and then the other weeks it's a Q&A. So it's no topics really. Sometimes I have a guest with my Q&A, and sometimes it's just me, like this week, and we talk through the news, the questions you have. What are you learning? What maybe what I'm learning, what I'm building. Right now, I am focused on updating a little bit of content in Docker Mastery, adding some advanced sections on Docker files, and some of the really cool stuff that's come out in the last few years of Docker files. Also adding some more Kubernetes. In fact, videos I just recorded this week for Docker Mastery course. Again, links below in case you don't have those. In the description are coupons that you can get those courses, and there's a Kubernetes section I'm adding on a little bit more information on some of the commands like describe and some of the Git options, some of the things about some of the information about events and what events are, how to use them. So that stuff wasn't really in the Docker Mastery course. I tend to get into more details in the Kubernetes Mastery course, but I wanted to add more to Docker Mastery. So that's what I've been working on lately. And then we have a Maven course next month. Maven is my live course. So that's the platform. And I'm doing a live course. This is now the second group that will be going through this. And I love this format. I'm excited about it. I want to do more courses like this. So tell me in chat if you have ideas for other topics. But the topic that we're focused on right now is GitHub Actions and Argo CD. GitHub Actions for CI, Argo CD for CD. Two sides of the coin of I just edited some code. How do I get that into production? And there's a huge amount of complexity and steps that we've all created in the industry between committing code and users using that code. So this is a course where you spend 90 minutes with me every other day in Zoom for 2 weeks. So it's a total of 9 hours. I'd say about half of that time is spent on us not just learning from a few slides and having a conversation about some things, but also implementing them. I have a whole test organization in this course. You will basically make a new GitHub org, and you will fill it with applications that we will then create CI for, and then we will deploy to Kubernetes. So you actually get your hands on with all these different things. We get into the weeds. So what's cool about these live courses is you can ask questions at any time. And so we can deal with your specific environmental concerns or the issues with your company. And it's not just generic Udemy training. It can be very targeted. And that's what I love about it, is we can solve real problems in class. And then about the other 50% is all Q&A and us digging into those concerns. Like someone might have more specific questions about how do I use Terraform in CI to spin up clusters automatically for testing, something I call a smoke test. Well, we can do that. And ahead of time, we plan ahead to make sure we're going to have the custom content that you need answers to for that course. So if you're curious, that is all available over on, let's see, it's bret.courses/auto deploy. So let me just copy that out and give that to you. You probably have heard of this because I've been talking about it all year, but it's a lot of fun. Hello, everyone. Hello, Conrad, Ron, Ali, Martin, Parashiva. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Desorge. Sorry if I mispronounced those names. You all have wonderful names. I'm just horrible at everything English and every other language. So sorry for that. But thanks for all for being here. All right. So the way we start this off is I need topic starters from you. I need things we're going to talk about. And then that kind of leads us down the road of the rabbit holes, right? We start getting in the weeds of technical problems, of strategies, of things you want to do in cloud native. And since I'm in Portland, we're in the northwest of America where things like coffee and beer are taken seriously. I have a custom freshly brewed cup of coffee from my friend Michael, who is in the other room because I'm staying at his house. Thanks, Michael. He's a coffee connoisseur, so he has coffee stuff everywhere. And of course, I love coffee, so it's always fun to visit because I get to enjoy the best coffee that there is in the North. Well, just really worldwide because he gets a bunch of coffee from everywhere. But I tend to be a little simpler than that with my own coffee at home. But here, if I could turn the camera around, you could see like what looks like a bunch of beakers and Bunsen burners and all sorts of fancy stuff for making coffee. Coffee machines on the floor that he's taken apart. And he's like assembling or messing around with milk frothers and coffee brewers and espresso makers. And so, yeah. And I mean, I'm in his set. He actually has his own podcast called Oil Slick Coffee. So if you're into coffee, he's sort of in the biz and he interviews people in the coffee making industry, and you wouldn't believe how much there is in that. Like a lot of us just drink coffee and we don't think about it. We know it comes from a plant that's harvested somewhere in the world, but there's farmers, there's brokers, there's distributors, there's all these different people. There's conferences, just like we have tech conferences, they have coffee conferences. There's certifications, and they have their own thing, and it's a vast network. So anyway, check out Oil Slick Coffee. I'll put a link in there if you're curious about the podcast. So we are here this week, and I'm actually meeting some people. Hopefully, we haven't scheduled that out today, but meeting some people with a couple of startups. One of them specifically is in the CI industry, a CI startup that is, I don't think they were actually MVP ready. Like I don't think they actually have customers yet. I think they're still very early days. So I'm hoping to learn about them a little bit this week and have some coffee with them. So that'll be fun. All right. What questions do you all have for me today? Let's see. I have some things. Let's see. So I've been looking a little bit lately. Let's see if we can bring up the browser here. My setup, I haven't tested this on my setup, so we'll just see if this works. Hey, look, it worked. I don't know if any of you have used, let me know in chat if you use the Red Hat UBI, so the universal base image from Red Hat. And I love this idea. It's not a new thing necessarily, but it's something that I spent a little time with recently working on. And I want to know what you all think, because I'm not really sure how many people are using this or are interested in something like this, because not all of us are on, I don't know, the Red Hat stack, or what do you want to call it, the Yum community instead of the apt community. but I am curious how many people are using it and whether it's useful for adding it into my courses. Because a lot of my stuff, if you've been around and you've seen my stuff, I tend to default to Ubuntu because that traditionally not necessarily the most popular distribution of Linux in the enterprise, but when it comes to sort of the internet and the clouds and just sort of hobbyists and getting started on Linux, it tends to be, Ubuntu and its variants, right? There's Mint, there's a lot of other things that are based on Ubuntu. All these Debian-based distributions, they tend to be what I see the most of. So a lot of my content, in fact, pretty much all of my content is focused on those distribution-based images. And we have several other sort of universal base images out there. Red Hat has this UBI one. If you've heard me talk about ChainGuard. ChainGuard is a new security company. They were on this show, I believe, last year. And they have essentially a base image called Wolfi, which is an open source project. And let's see if I can. So if you've been to wolfi.dev, if you've been on this show with me before, you've probably heard me talk about it. Wolfi is I don't know, you might call it an anti-distribution. It's not you can't install it on a Linux server. It's not meant for that. It's container focused, kind of like the Red Hat UBI, but the Red Hat UBI is based on Red Hat's, package management system and community of resources for CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora, all those things. And Wolfi is sort of, if there's anything it's based on Alpine. But if you know me at all, you know that I'm not always a fan of Alpine. There's definitely a place for it, but I don't use it all the time. And there are reasons. If you're interested in those reasons, let me know in chat. We can talk about it. But Alpine has, one of the bigger challenges of Alpine is the choice of C libraries that it ships with, and those can be a challenge for a lot of apps because they're not necessarily built with that particular C++ library. And so Wolfi tries to solve that by actually shipping multiple. Well, I think they ship multiple libraries, but they ship out of the box with the same ones that we're all used to. Let's just say that, and they also have a different sort of a different method for installing packages if you want. We're talking about system OS packages, and a little bit more focused on security, or a lot more focused on security. And so this is something that I continue to try to use in my projects, and it's getting better all the time. And what I'm always concerned about with stuff like this is if I recommend it to you and it ends up being really complicated to get started with, then you may just toss it out. You may not use it. So I'm always sensitive that we're all very busy. We all have too many tools. We have too many things to learn. We can't learn it all. So where can we focus our time on something that's going to be relatively easy to get started with and use, and that I can just rely on long term, right? So when I think about being a teacher and educator, I'm always concerned about that. That's why you don't see me showing you all the latest, brand new tools, because I want to make sure that before we start showing it off in a way, like maybe if I'm teaching it in a course or if I'm recommending it, I want to make sure that it's going to be around, that it has a consistent, stable project in open source that's getting consistent updates, and it's got financial backing so that it can live forever, or at least live for the reasonable future. And Wolfi has all of that. It is a new project, and what I recommend, if you're not aware of it and you want to get started, is don't go after the Wolfi base image. What you want to look for is what's called the ChainGuard images, which they now have a list, which is nice. And look for the specific thing you want to run. So let's just look for Python, right? So this would be the image that you would use as your base image for Python. And the goal here is that it's a safer, more secure default than the Docker Hub versions. So you would be using ChainGuard base images, not Docker Hub base images. And they run it on their own registry, so it's not on Hub. They might cross-post to Hub. I don't actually know that for certain, but I would always recommend just using this one, because they're focused on the supply chain of these images being built, stored in a registry, and they provide some other tools that allow you to ensure the integrity of these images and how they're made. And you can make your own base images. That part gets a little more complicated. It uses some new tools that you're maybe not familiar with. So I don't recommend you starting that way first. What you want to start with first is try one of these. One of these will feel very familiar to you. However, it doesn't ship by default with a package manager in the image. So you won't get an apt or a yum or an APK experience with these. So the best way to use one of these, if you're gonna, let's say if you're gonna use a Python image, is if you only need to install pip stuff. If you only need the Python installers, and that'll work great, and that'll work out of the box, and you can go forth today, and instead of having a default Python image from Docker Hub that might have 300 vulnerabilities, this one could have 0. A lot of their images, their goal is to have 0 CVEs in them. And one of the things that ChainGuard will actually do is they will actually go and fix the code to prevent CVEs, or they will essentially try to find a workaround or a way to avoid that library altogether. So they are very focused on solving the problems that maybe Docker Hub doesn't try to solve. So if you look at the Docker Hub base images, those are fine, but it's not like Docker's going out and fixing Ubuntu vulnerabilities in the curl package, right? Like Docker doesn't try to solve that. They let the industry try to work that out, and they just host it. Whereas I feel like ChainGuard is taking a little bit more proactive approach, and they're looking at the Java base image and trying to figure out how to ship that without any CVEs. So check them out. They've been on the show on this YouTube channel. You can go back, just search ChainGuard and DevOps and Docker Talk, and you'll probably find that episode. And it's also on the podcast. All right. Looks like we got some questions. Let's see. Got to figure out my my configuration here. There we go. There we go. All right. Conrad, you are at Apple Park? Awesome. That's awesome this week. I have never been to a WWDC. Yeah, you need to take a picture and jump into our Discord server. By the way, did you know we have a Discord server? Right over there, devops.fan. Over 14,000 DevOps people all hanging out in chat. So, Conrad, you should jump in there and post some selfies. That would be really cool. I've yet to even see that campus, and it looks amazing. So, hello to everyone showing up a little late. I'm still catching up with chat. All right. What are some emerging trends or technologies in the DevOps landscape that you find particularly exciting or promising? Well, if you're around, you're a regular, Conrad, so there's not going to be really anything new, but it's a great place to start. I appreciate you getting the conversation started. I'd say probably in the last couple of years for me. I mean, we could talk about AI for a minute, but really, I think to me, the rise of GitHub Actions and then GitOps are the two things. GitHub Actions as a universal CI tool for most of us, because many of us, I mean, I'd say the majority of us, keep our code in GitHub, and that becoming maybe not the only CI tool, because we never really want just one tool, right? But certainly the tool that is now the tool to beat. And I think we're seeing other companies actually possibly even take GitHub Actions and make them compatible, so that we maybe somehow get a de facto standard for how we write our CI. And for some of you who are following Solomon Hykes and some of the team that built Docker, they have a new company which we're going to have, I'm hoping to have on the show later this year. And we talk about them. But let me pull it up just so I know what you know what I'm talking about. So Dagger is a new idea around CI, and it essentially is, what if every CI could run a universal CI tool that you can also run locally or on your own servers without a centralized platform, or you could run it inside of other platforms. That is maybe my definition of Dagger, and it's essentially a universal CI. I'm just going to say it's a universal automation system. CI and CD, you know, we all do things in automation now that aren't technically strictly CI or CD, and I tend to just say automation platforms, but we've all kind of stuck with the CI/CD terminology, but it's all just automation. So they have a platform for automation. It's open source, and they're doing interesting things there. I wanted to wait to deliberately to have them on the show because I wanted to wait until, again, it was a little more baked and ready to go so that we could have something that looked easy to get started. It had all the features everybody was expecting. It worked in all the ways that we all thought it should work. And they have been rapidly improving. And in fact, they keep shipping new features, and I'm following their Twitter feed essentially to find out what's going on. And some of my friends work there, so I'm definitely going to have them on the show. We just haven't set a date yet. But that is maybe a futuristic idea of the idea that we have a problem in this industry around too many tools. And I walk into any shop with a decent amount of developers, meaning more than 10. They're probably going to have more than one automation tool. And they might have Jenkins over there, and then maybe they're using like some CodeShip or Travis or GitLab or GitHub. They've got something over there, and then maybe they're using a little bit of automation in Kubernetes. Maybe they're using Argo workflows, or they're using something that's built on top of Kubernetes. Maybe they're doing something in a cloud using a cloud's automation tool like Azure DevOps or AWS's tools. In other words, there's a lot, right? There's a lot of different tools that do part of the automation. And what if the idea actually took off that it didn't really matter which of those places we ran it, that it was all in a universal format that could all be either run locally or anywhere, and where we ran it was just a choice. It wasn't a lock-in platform decision on, every one of these files is different. And you can't just take a file for automation on GitHub and run it somewhere else. And so this is an interesting idea. I don't know if it's going to take off, and I don't know how they're going to make money. So we definitely have to wait and see on that. But I think CI in general, starting in 2017, 2018 at DockerCon, and probably, if my memory is correct, like probably all the other conferences, we had O'Reilly conferences at the time, we had KubeCon. But I specifically remember at DockerCon around 2017, 2018, we started talking that the next big wave of innovation was probably going to be in the middle, the automation space between, Docker run on your local machine and Kubernetes apply, kube-control apply on your production cluster. There's this big nebulous middle area where we all need to do most of the same stuff. We need to do some testing, multiple forms of testing. We probably should lint. We probably should security scan, a CVE scanner for our images. We probably should smoke test, meaning we should actually spin up the containers we just built, the images we just built, into containers, test them with our Kubernetes YAML, and do health checks and maybe some additional testing, like end-to-end testing on that cluster. Let's call that a smoke test. That cluster gets spun up, you do all that testing, and it tears down. Right? That's a very common thing nowadays for teams to do because they want to make sure that there's no hiccup later with maybe the Kubernetes YAML or some other part of the configuration. Maybe it's the secrets provider, maybe it's your ingress rules. It could be a lot of things that aren't strictly in your code. And so let's call that a smoke test. All of that stuff, in general, we all tend to need to do it. And we haven't yet arrived at a universal path and a universal set of tools for that. And I don't know if we're ever really going to get there, but I feel like it's really one of the areas that I could walk from one team to another, even in the same company, and that path of workflow is so different. It is never the same. And certainly between two companies, different tools, different steps, different plugins, different processes, workflows, pipelines, whatever you want to call it. They're all different. And we've all started to settle on containers as a uniform way for packaging and shipping and running code. We've all started to settle on Linux as the dominant OS of choice. We've all sort of settled on the idea that this application needs to be able to run locally and in the cloud and in our data center the same. We've even with Kubernetes now started to standardize networking configuration, policy management, ingress rules, firewalls. Like those are all things they're starting to consolidate in a universal open format. But we still have this nebulous middle area. So if there's any area that's going to need continual overhaul and sort of deciding what's going to be the universal format there, I think it's the automation and CI stuff. So I don't really have an answer for it. The other area that was deployments, right? The CD part of it. But I think we're all really starting to settle on GitOps, right? So if that's why I'm teaching this course because I believe that GitHub Actions is becoming one of the, if not, it's going to soon, I believe, be the most popular automation platform for code. It is, what you're seeing happening is the GitHub Actions usage is going up and up and up, and the Jenkins usage is starting to decline. So I fully expect for some industry survey here soon to say officially GitHub Actions is now the most used automation or CI tool or whatever you want to call it. We probably should all just wait for the Stack Overflow survey to say that, but I think that day is coming. It may not be this year. So I wanted to teach GitHub Actions, but that's not all of it because I think we have a better way of deploying than just kube control apply from an automation script. And that's what GitOps is. And I think that a lot of the teams are implementing GitOps and then they do more and more things in GitOps. And I like this model, and I like that we started with Kubernetes with GitOps, and I'm hoping that we GitOps more things because this could essentially standardize the industry's methodology for deployments. And if we can do that, then we can start to talk about universal file formats, universal configurations, and then when you shift from one job to another or when you change teams, you don't have to completely relearn the deployment process or their thinking on how they want to deploy. You can just look for that repository or the two repositories that have the GitOps configuration, have your application YAML or whatever you need, and I'm really looking forward to that consistency. One of the big friction points I see a lot of times with teams is when they have to onboard new people, or they change teams, or they change projects, and this entire process is different. So I really, I wanted to start teaching this stuff because I think that GitOps has the traction. It's now turned into its own conference. We have multiple conferences now on GitOps. It used to be its own day at KubeCon, and it still is, but there's now additional conferences in the industry. We now have at least 3, maybe even 4 tools, at least maybe 5 or 6 if I think about it now, that are GitOps deployment tools. And you start to see other CI companies all jumping on the bandwagon saying, we do GitOps too. So that's a great sign. If we can get consensus in the industry that this methodology is a universal way for deploying at least most of our stuff, maybe not everything, but most of our stuff, I think that's a big thing to learn. So I don't consider GitOps required learning yet, but we're getting there. We're getting close. So that's why I created this course, because I wanted to provide the people that want to get into this stuff now. I wanted to give them a happy path, like a very specific protocol for how to implement these tools, how to use them, what not to do. So that's a great question, Conrad. I'm glad you asked it. Yeah, Martin says, back to the image discussion, Martin says he uses Scratch. Well, if you can, and this gets me onto the subject of protocols, this gets me on the subject of application languages. And I think application languages, we can look at the last 40 years of languages and we can see trends related to infrastructure. So if you've been on my show before and you've heard me rant on this, go grab your coffee. But for those that haven't, I'm going to get on a soapbox and say that the time of which languages are invented, and it's not just languages anymore, right? Because the original language usually comes with some frameworks, it comes with a package manager, it comes with sort of all the things we sort of expect of a language nowadays, right? It's a little different than the stuff we did in the 70s and 80s where you didn't always ship a package manager, you didn't always give an ecosystem, you just made a language and a build tool essentially to compile that language or run that language. So if you go back in time and you start looking at older languages, Java, PHP, JavaScript, and maybe specifically Node.js, Ruby, C Sharp, Visual Basic, C++, Rust is a new one, relatively new one. So if you look at these languages, when they were created in the industry, they tended to try to solve the limitations of the day, which means over time of the last 30, 40 years, we've had times where storage was expensive, but compute was cheap. We've had times where storage was cheap and computing was expensive. We've had times where networking was slow, so we needed things to be on disk and efficient. We had times where we didn't have a way to easily deploy a server, so we needed to be able to do things in a way that they were easier to all live on servers together. They maybe reused libraries between multiple applications. We've had, all sorts of trends in the industry, and that influences languages. So I tend to, if you ask me, what languages do I prefer? I tend to prefer new languages because those languages are trying to solve the problems that we have today. So if you look at the modern languages like Go, like two of the most popular ones that are relatively new within the last 10 to 15 years, two that stick out to me are Rust and Go. There's a lot of other ones, but Rust and Go, especially in cloud native, are very popular, and they are compiled languages, and you can use Scratch. So this gets back to your point of you try to use Scratch when possible. That was what Martin said. And really the only way you can use Scratch easily is if you can compile your application. Languages like Python, Ruby, a lot of these, they don't natively do that. JavaScript doesn't natively do that. So then you need, in your container, you need probably a application package manager for like the OS. You need something outside of the framework itself. And then you might have the actual framework or language package manager on top of that. That instantly makes things harder, right? I really don't want to have to use an OS package manager nowadays. That was something that we used, to me, that's a 90s and 2000s thing. apt and yum and APK, I really don't want those anymore because they have effects. They have problems. They are not treated the same as your application package managers. So when you start to look at some of these new languages like Go specifically, you tend to not need any of those OS packages in your container when you compile your Go binary. Fantastic. That's so great because you have less problems. You have a faster build time usually. Your images are smaller, more secure. I mean, what's more secure than shipping one file in a container? It might be a really big file. It might be a 300 meg file, but it's one file. Everything is compiled into it. And the only way you can access any of the code is through executing it in that binary. That tends to be safer, it turns out. Yes, it's redundant. Yes, it means a little more storage is used, but Go wasn't trying to solve the problems of the 90s and 2000s, which was slow CPUs, slow networks, and really expensive disks. We don't need to share an SSL library between 5 different applications anymore. We don't need to concern ourselves with saving 50 megs. We just don't. We now have terabyte storage in all of our computers. So we just don't need to worry about that level of problem that those package managers were trying to solve in the 90s and 2000s. So I'm not a fan of that anymore. I much prefer languages like Go and Rust and, honestly, anything that can compile into a static binary. where all the libraries were included, I'm a fan. Everything else, we have Wasm. So you will have seen on this show several times in the last year, we've had WebAssembly shows where we're specifically talking about using WebAssembly in cloud native. Now, WebAssembly has lots of cool functionality. I don't recommend it for prime time yet. It's a little early. WebAssembly has been around for years. Cloud native WebAssembly, where we're running WebAssembly on servers, is a little new, but it's rapidly improving. And in fact, I just had a show in December on WebAssembly for cloud native, and if I had one today, it would be a much different story, even just 6 months later. So we're going to probably have another show later this year. I'll probably invite back some smart people that are way smarter on WebAssembly than me. But I see WebAssembly as the potential for us to take a lot of older languages and make them statically compiled, essentially, where you're only shipping a single file or a small set of files, depending on what you're building, in an image without all of this OS stuff, all this OS package manager stuff, all these different levels of package managers. Anytime I have to use multiple package managers, I basically consider that a problem. And it's going to create inefficiency, complexity, testing issues. Often with OS package managers, it's not easy to keep versions in there over time, because even a lot of the package managers, they won't keep but the latest version, or maybe the latest version and the last version. And then you have to, in order to get the newest version, you have to upgrade the whole OS, which is a problem in itself. So I tend to really start to try to, if I'm working with a team and we're brand new, we're not using any of the runtime languages like Node.js, PHP, Ruby. We're not using any of those. C#. We are using languages where we can compile this thing down and it runs super fast. It's super small. When I say we're talking about the things that are the assets in production. And you won't see container images with thousands of files unless it's a website with images and HTML pages. Then it's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of files. But other than that, any backend code, it's all going to be in a compiled language, if not WebAssembly. WebAssembly, I don't know anyone that's using WebAssembly in production. It does exist in production. If you go to KubeCon, you will hear people showing off their WebAssembly, but we were still really early days. Some of the things that you and I think are easy and normal to do in code, still quite hard to do in WebAssembly for cloud native, because when you make it cloud native or run it on a server by itself, not in a browser, you have to concern yourself with things like networking, file systems, Linux kernel permissions, all the different system calls, and that's WASI, WebAssembly Systems Interface. And so that is the ecosystem that we're going to see grow up very quickly here pretty soon. So if there's any trends in DevOps, I would say watch my videos on Wasm, go read up or watch some other videos on WebAssembly for cloud native, and that will prepare you for what you need to know with Kubernetes and Docker, so that when your developers come to you and say, we have a WebAssembly container, because that's now a thing, and you have to run it differently with a different runtime. That's all getting really easy to do compared to even just a year ago. So eventually what will happen, I'm predicting this, it's not a fact, it's just a prediction. When you deploy your Kubernetes clusters or your Docker servers, if you don't need Kubernetes, you will be able to run a WebAssembly container with a WebAssembly runtime. But the difference is the runtime isn't in the image. If you think about Node.js or PHP or Python or C#, these are languages that have to ship with their runtime. So when you get a Node.js container image, it's got Node.js in it. But if you have 20 different versions of Node.js on the server, you can do that because there's an individual one in each image. With WebAssembly, we've decided that the runtime lives on the host. Maybe a mistake, not sure yet. But it's running on the host, and the only thing in the image is the binary that's run by WebAssembly, because WebAssembly needs that layer of abstraction between the Linux kernel and the WebAssembly binary itself. So I think it's actually a pretty cool idea. It gets our images smaller. It allows us to be able to ship what we call Linux containers now, because we have to specify, right? It's not just a container, it's a Linux container. We can run that side by side now with a WebAssembly container. And they're different types of containers. If you actually looked at their platform with Docker commands, or with you can use kube control commands as well, you will see that the type of platform for that container is different. The image is not Linux / x64, right? It is going to be Wasm WASI, because there's not even an architecture that you have to worry about, because the runtime worries about the architecture and not the actual Wasm WASI binary. So that means you can ship an image that can run on any OS as long as that OS has a runtime installed for WebAssembly. That's a different setup than what we're used to with container images. So I'm excited about that. But for you, the DevOps people, what you need to concern yourself with is not how to program necessarily in WebAssembly. You need to worry about, how do I run a WebAssembly container? How is that image different? How do I make that image? How do I ship that image? What registries support it? What tools support it? And then how do I run it in Kubernetes alongside everything else? So that's what you need to figure out. And I can imagine myself eventually, I don't have any plans for this, but I can imagine myself probably creating some sections in my courses specifically around the setup and the workflow for using WebAssembly containers. As I'm calling it, WebAssembly Wasm. So, I'm catching up with chat there. Look at that shirt. Thank you. It is a new shirt. Anseq, I am in Portland, Oregon. So I am on the West Coast today. Thanks, Conrad, for answering that. Yeah, Maz is saying ChainGuard did a great job. Chiral, sorry if I mispronounced that. 20 Spring Boot microservices in Kubernetes, 3 nodes, memory limits, best way of estimating, measuring the resource limit values. You need 2 things, and there's not a single tool for this. When you want to estimate, measure resource limit values, how would you have done that before containers? How did you size servers before containers were a thing? That's the same method. That hasn't changed. If you need to load test your app, whether that's in CI, right? So during your testing phase, you should do load testing. Mature companies do load testing, and a mature team will have tools, and there is not one universal tool for this, so I can't really recommend a tool for you. But if it's a web tool, if it's a website or it provides a web API, that's how you interface with that program, then you can use a simple tool like Apache Bench to throw 10,000 hits at it in 5 seconds or whatever, right? Like you can hammer this thing, and then you need to track its CPU and memory usage. Then you can take those numbers and you put them in your YAML. If you can't do that, the only other way to measure these things really is to put it into production without limits or with really, really high limits, and then monitor the real world usage of your apps, and then tighten down those configurations as you go. And that's what I usually do with the teams. If I walk into a team, they don't have limits, they don't have resource limits and reservations, the first thing we do is, they probably are already in production. So we'll just look at their real world stats. We'll look at what they're doing in real world production today. We'll bump it up, we'll give them an extra headroom of like 20%, maybe even 50% if we're just not sure. And then we put those numbers in the YAML and we update. Then we hope we don't have any problems. Over time, if we feel extremely comfortable with the utilization, we might tighten those down even more. Especially if we have like spiky traffic, right? If you're running an e-commerce website and you have spiky traffic on holidays, you're going to want to have those very conservative. So that means high numbers. If your application's only using 1 gig of RAM, you might give it 1.5 gig of RAM as a limit, and you might make the reservation, 1.2 gig of RAM, something like that. And so the reservation is conservative and make sure that there's always enough room, and then the limit, because the limit, if you hit those limits, is going to crash, right? So you don't want to really hit the limits on memory. So that's what we do. I tend to look just in production at their production monitoring. There's no special tool for that. There might be, and someone may correct me in chat, there might be some tools that if you're using particular monitoring, or if you got particular things in Kubernetes, you might be able to just extract some of this stuff from Kubernetes and then automatically update YAML. That would actually be a pretty cool tool. I don't know that that exists yet. So for teams that are creating new apps, brand new greenfield apps, they have no idea, what we try to do for them is we try to set up an automation that will benchmark that application during testing, and then we'll document those numbers. And even better, we'll take those numbers and compare them to the last time to see if they've changed. One of the big things that bites people over time with reservations and limits is when an application gets a bunch of new functionality and it starts to use more CPU, or more importantly, RAM, because RAM is the one that you'll get into trouble with if you hit the limit. So they'll start using, they'll add a new functionality that ends up needing a huge cache in memory. And then they don't think about changing limits. They ship it to production and it crashes. The way to avoid that is that you have to implement something in your CI pipelines that will do the load testing, track the numbers, and then compare them to the previous numbers. There's maybe some tools out there that do that, but I don't know. I don't know those tools. So if you're in chat and you know some of these things, if you're doing some of these things now, help a person out. That's a great question. Chiral, sorry if I mispronounced that. So throw that in chat if you know anything about that. That's what I would do. Ali is saying, if we don't have a firewall yet and we want to secure our apps in the cluster from DDoS, what is your suggestion? Well, a simple firewall isn't going to protect you from DDoS. What you're going to need is a WAF, a web application firewall. So I'm assuming, you didn't specify, Ali, but I'm assuming you're talking about web stuff. HTTP is the protocol, yes? So look at WAF stuff like CloudFormation. I'm just going to bring up a couple here. Because I know of a couple. In fact, I have a friend that actually runs a WAF company. But if you look up, you can find possibly stuff that in Kubernetes that supports web application firewalls, or you can outsource it. Sorry, I'm just looking up some names of stuff here. In fact, if there's anyone in chat that uses a WAF or some sort of proxy, let me know. Put that in chat. So a friend of mine actually is a specialist in the world of WAF. And I just want to show off their product real quick. Expedited WAF. So this is specifically for Heroku, actually. So if you're not on Heroku, you can't use this one. But he started with this company, and they were so successful. Let me see if I can find the other one. Yeah, so this is, yeah, expedited security. So the new company actually serves a lot of the clouds, and it's a plug and play system, but you can put these kind of things in front of any Kubernetes cluster that you need to have internet traffic on. And they can provide DDoS protection, um, penetration protection. So if they're trying to figure out how to do a SQL attack or some sort, if they're looking to see if you have WordPress installed, if you actually looked at logs, companies aren't necessarily always DDoSing. They sometimes are just trying to hit certain URLs to sneak around any sort of security vulnerabilities you might have, or known products that you might have installed that have known security vulnerabilities. And so a WAF does a lot of things, but one of the things that I really like them for is to look for nefarious type of activity that isn't normal traffic, that's not necessarily DDoS or even DOS. Maybe they're trying to actually pull information out. They're trying to extract information. So you need something like that. And I think really everyone needs something like that in front of their Kubernetes cluster, anything you're putting on the internet. If you're trying to do business, it's not just a personal blog, but it's actually a company business. My own websites all have all this just for my own stuff. They have some sort of WAF in front of them, and there's lots of options. The clouds tend to have a built-in option. They're application-aware firewalls that essentially know HTTP, and you can put this in cluster, but that's going to take more work. I'd rather just outsource that to another company. If anyone else is using something, just vote for what you. Maz is saying Falco protect from DDoS. No, it does not. Falco is only a system monitoring tool that logs, and it only logs bad behavior at the kernel level. So it's not going to detect any sort of HTTP traffic. It's not going to detect. Well, that's not true. It could if it wanted to, but I don't think there's Falco rules for inspecting HTTP traffic. I don't think it does that. I think it's more about system calls. So it would be between the application and the Linux kernel. That's where Falco plays. Yeah, let me put the URL for expedited security in there. And I'm trying to think of what's the other one that I use. Yeah, I use Cloudflare a lot, so I'm just going to show that one. Cloudflare is very popular. Oh, they're going to give me a stupid little fill out our form. So a lot of you have heard of Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a very big company. I mean, a major portion of the internet actually goes through Cloudflare proxies, which are essentially WAFs, because they can detect denial of services and other things. And this is very much like expedited security, but they do way more. They're not as focused on the WAF problem. So if you just need WAF, go check out expedited. But if you're looking, for example, I use Cloudflare to do URL redirection. I use Cloudflare to store my DNS registrar. I use Cloudflare to cache my web pages so that my web pages are faster. And it can do a lot of that stuff. In fact, it's essentially its own cloud that sits in front of your other clouds or your data center. And if I logged in and showed you, I'm only using a fraction of what it offers, but it offers a lot of that stuff. It does Let's Encrypt for my website. So if I want a website on the back end that doesn't have Let's Encrypt, I can put this in the front. It's kind of like outsourcing your web proxy. But expedited is very targeted for just WAF, and it's very plug and play. And it actually, some expedited stuff is pretty cool. It actually will do analysis of your server's public IP addresses to make sure. This is actually a different tool they're building. Tell me if you're interested in the public IP one. So if you put servers on the internet, that IP actually has a reputation. And that reputation matters, because if you're on a IP for your web server that is a known spam host that is trying to send out spam, that could affect the ability for, if that system is trying to send out maybe transactional emails or alert emails or something like that, it might not work because that server's on a bad IP. So they have Let me see if I can look that one up in case anybody's interested. Yeah, IP Investigator. So this is one of their things. Not really related to the DDoS, but it's more about reputation. And if you check this out, they actually have a little tool. Let's see if I can find it. Nope, that's on Heroku. So there's another one. Am I clicking on the right thing? Yeah. I'm not sure I have the right thing. Let me see if I can find that. All right, I'm actually asking my friend because I couldn't find that website. All right, let's make sure I'm not missing any chat. It's a great question, Ollie. Thank you for asking that one. Hello, Alexandru. Hello. Glad to have you here. Yeah, Moz is talking about Golang. Back to my language rant. That's yeah. I mean, people love Go. Golang is kind of, it's the universal language for all the cloud native tools that you're using. I mean, Kubernetes, Docker, just about everything, traffic, it's all built in Go. So if all those major projects that run the world's computing now can run on Go, then I'd say it's probably good for all of our business applications. But I know some people choose other languages for various reasons. One of which is just familiarity. Like the team knows Java, so we're gonna, and we have a standard on Java, and I get that. The problem that I have though is that a lot of times we don't realize the fact that choosing a language on a new tool is like a decade decision, right? Because most applications we build don't go away. They stay around forever unless the company goes away, and then sometimes it still lives on as a new company that was bought them. So when we're making those framework and language decisions, particularly the language decision, we're really making a decade or multi-decade decision for the company, and there's a very tough. It's a lot of factors, and I've always seen teams struggle with it. Sometimes Golang and Rust and some of these newer languages, they just show up because one person tried a small project with it without any major team evaluation. There was no major decision. They're just like, hey, I'm going to write this. We're going to write a new feature for the website, but I don't want to write it in our monolith app. So I'm just going to write it in Golang. And then we'll use an ingress to route that URL to the Go instead of to the Ruby or whatever. And they end up liking it, and they write more things with it. And then pretty soon it becomes a de facto language. I get it that most of us can't, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us can't just willy-nilly pick a language. And we there's someone higher up in the food chain that has to pick it for us. And we only have approved languages and frameworks. And I get that. That's a tough road to be in, because now you have to actually prove a language's merits before you can even use it. And that can sometimes be hard, because if you're new, trying to find the advantages can be a tough thing. A lot of times the advantages of one language or package system over another don't become self-evident until we've used it a while and we can frame that mental model. I wouldn't actually even trust blog articles on this. I wouldn't trust blog analysis. And unless it was a very specific programmer that was a part of a team that wrote, maybe a very long detailed blog post on Medium or on their own website where they were They were very well versed in both languages. They used both heavily, and they could really articulate why they chose one over another. I don't tend to trust the, why Golang is popular sort of blog post, because it doesn't really have the true meat and details and the pros and cons of why that you want to switch to that language. But I'm very much pro Go for things, yeah. Is there any easy right way, Anton asks, hey Anton, for setting up locales inside of a container for the same image? For example, I need to run the same image for ENUS for DE locales. Yeah. This is a general weakness of being an American. I don't know how else to say it. Is I haven't had to deal with locales, and man, I mean it's been so many years that I'm not even sure the last time I had to deal with locales. It might have been pre-container. So I don't work with a lot of companies that need to, like, let's say ship a website in 10 different languages, other than it's just built into the website code and it becomes a part of the website framework for language support. So my answer to you is I really don't know. I'm curious if anyone else has had to do that, a container image which has a different locale. I'm assuming you're using environment variables. That was how I remember doing it. Is that not enough? I don't actually know. I'm fine. I got coffee.
You don't want any more?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Talking too much, not drinking enough. Thanks. Yeah, Martin's pointing out, by the way, about you can compile Spring Boot applications to native code. This may not be faster, but programs tend to use a lot less memory. This works with Spring Boot 3 and up. So that's good information for those Java people. There's a lot of them out there. The big thing, and this is how I remember it. So let me know, Martin, if my memory is wrong. But on Java 11, I believe, was that the first one that allowed us? It allowed Java to be aware of C groups, so it could basically properly set memory limits without you having to hard code those in the options. That's where, I don't remember which Java version specifically it was, but that's where I started to focus on when I used my Java. I haven't built any Java examples for probably 3 years. And when I did, I was very much focused on using the newer Java versions that would not use all the memory on the server until they ran an OOM crash, essentially. So yeah, Palo Alto, a popular traditional firewall company, NGF. All right, I don't know about that one. Hey Keith, I just finished the Docker mastery class. The beginning, you mentioned that the complexity of Kubernetes may not be worth the overhead versus Swarm. Do you still feel that Kubernetes is overly complex? Well, I think it depends on who you are. I think for many people, Kubernetes can be overly complex. You can tell this, and Swarm isn't always your answer, by the way. The Docker mastery course doesn't teach every way to run a container in the cloud. That is probably a different course, or if it was a part of Docker Mastery, it would be hours and hours of content. Recently, I had someone on the show about AWS, and we didn't actually go through every single one of them, but we talked about that there's over 17 ways to run containers on AWS. I think only 2 of those are Kubernetes. So there are now many, many ways to run containers, because container has become the universal, a container image is now the universal way to package and distribute and run your applications. It doesn't mean that Kubernetes or even Swarm are the ways to do it. Kubernetes and Swarm, to me, are the two ways I would choose to run my containers if I had to run my own servers. But what we're starting to see now is for a lot of solutions, you don't even need to run your own servers. You can use cloud services. In AWS, there's App Runner, there's Lambdas, there's, let's see, what else? There's Lambda and App Runner are the two that I can think of. On Google, there's Google Cloud Run. On Azure, I think it's called Container Applications or Container Apps, I think. I'm trying to remember, their name is a little generic. But they all now have ways where you can run multiple containers and build out your tooling for how all your apps talk to each other, and you never have to care about the orchestrator. In fact, we recently had a whole company on the show. Let me just pull up that episode so we can look at it real quick. But we had a whole company on the show that has their own, this is Cycle. Let me see if I can't get a logo. Yeah, so we had Cycle on the show, and Cycle runs the orchestration for you, and it's not Kubernetes. So what we're starting to see is that Kubernetes has become part of the boilerplate infrastructure that you don't necessarily have to concern yourself with. A lot of us still have old habits, so a lot of us still choose to run our own servers that we have to patch and we have to monitor and we have to replace. And that's true in the cloud because the original clouds back in 2007, 2009, those clouds all were giving us VMs. But the reality is the next wave of this computing is you don't have to care about Kubernetes. At minimum, nowadays, at minimum, I would be using something like AWS Fargate, which manages the Kubernetes for me. I still have to create my application YAML and my Helm charts, but I don't need to run a cluster. So that removes the complexity of backing it up, of making it fault tolerant. And with Kubernetes, with AWS Fargate, I don't even have to run the nodes because a lot of hosted Kubernetes like AKS, EKS, DigitalOcean, Google, all of these, I have to choose to upgrade my Kubernetes version. But more importantly, I have to replace the nodes. I have to patch the nodes or replace them or monitor them because I'm actually provisioning my own VMs. But this next level of abstraction, this stuff like Google Cloud Run and App Runner and this the Cycle company, these are the next wave, which are saying you can probably do 99% of what you need to do as a company without ever having to touch the Kubernetes API. And if you do have to touch it, you certainly, that's just to deploy applications. That is not because you need to manage nodes or that you need to, decide on a new node instance size. That's hard to say. You don't have to change your node instances. You don't have to swap them out for updated ones that have current patches. So I would say this is the evolution of Kubernetes. A lot of us are still old sysadmins that love to just manage servers. I can say that I still like to have a couple of servers that I can just get into and have, but for the most part, I don't like managing the infrastructure if I don't have to. So I very much prefer these new methods that I might still have YAML to describe my application, but I don't have to describe the infrastructure. This infrastructure scales to meet the needs of my application. And that largely makes Kubernetes cluster administration unnecessary. If you can do that, if you can do Fargate, if you can do, every cloud now has the equivalent of Fargate, which is fully managed Kubernetes. Do that. The next wave after that are things like App Runner and Cloud Run, which don't even have Kubernetes YAML. They are something else, something simpler that you configure to orchestrate all of your containers talking to each other. And so it's less work than Kubernetes to use those. And yes, these things are more expensive per hour or per compute, but often what ends up happening is that you actually save money in ways that you didn't expect. You save money because you're not running idle CPUs or idle servers. You don't have to over provision App Runner or Google Cloud Run, so you don't have to plan for the future because it's just using only the resource. You're only paying for what you use. So that often will save teams more money than they cost in extra fees to run these extra services that are a little bit more of a premium cost. If you consider it like how much per CPU and gig of RAM, it's a little premium compared to running your own servers. But when you're running your own servers, you have to pay the people, and the people are really expensive. So I tend, if I was going to do a new course on how to run containers in the cloud, I would not make it the Kubernetes mastery course or the Kubernetes part of the Docker mastery course. It would be a new course that's saying, how can we avoid SSH, right? I never want to SSH into a server. I want to use containers. I absolutely want containers, but I don't want to administrate a server, not a single one. How do I do that? And it turns out that every one of the major clouds has all these ways to do that now, multiple ways to run containers without Kubernetes. And even if it does Kubernetes, you're just managing your Helm chart or your customized YAML, not the infrastructure. So hopefully that helps. But welcome to the club, Keith. I'm glad you took the courses. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Istio, I'm not sure if Istio can prevent DDoS, but I wouldn't be surprised. If it can't out of the box, it might have some plugins that allow you to do that. Azure Application Firewall, that is another one that could probably do. I don't know the specific functionality of Azure Application Firewall, but the step one is it needs to be HTTPS aware or HTTP, right? It needs to understand that high level protocol. And then step two is it has to be able to react or monitor the headers coming in and make decisions based on that header. And that's essentially a WAF, right? It's HTTP aware, and it can make decisions to start warning and then blocking things on its own based on the bad behavior of how those connections are coming in. That's at least how I define a WAF. I don't know if that's the true definition. K6, Conrad's recommending K6 and DDoSify. If you're on macOS, you can use Xcode instruments. Yeah, thanks for the recommendations. That's good. I've not used K. I've heard of K6. I haven't had to use it. I've never heard of DDoSify, so I'm going to have to write those down. Let me write those down. Make a little note. By the way, have you heard of the Arc browser? This is my new favorite thing. One of my favorite things of 2023 is the Arc browser. It uses Chromium built in, so it works with all your extensions, all your Chrome, but it's a completely different UI and experience. And one of the things it has is built-in notes. So today I learned from the live stream. DDoSify, and I need to look up K6 again and actually test it. I'll just call that benchmark testing. So anyway, it's a browser that has a bunch of extra features, and one of them is built-in notes. I have Notion and all the other things, but sometimes it's just easy to put them in notes. So look up Arc, A-R-C, if you're interested. It's a really great browser. It's my new default browser. I absolutely love it. I love everything they're doing. I would pay them money, but currently it's only free. So I don't know how they're going to take money for it, but I would give them money if they let me for that browser. You're most welcome for membership. Thanks for being here. Did someone gift memberships? I know that we've had Ansa Q and some other people gift memberships before, but I didn't see any gift memberships yet. So, Martin's back. The C group Java thing. Okay, so it was Java 8, but it still had lots of issues, which were finally fixed in 10, but 10 is no longer supported. So yeah, so you want a supported Java that also supports containers, so that puts you at Java 11. Thanks for that. I have a couple of Java friends that are Java people that I need to clearly get an update on because I'm a little outdated, especially like with Maven stuff. I actually had some questions on Twitter this week about Maven Maven testing in containers, and I didn't actually have an answer for it, so I had to do some research to figure that out. Alexandru. Yeah, the Java 8. Good old Java 8. Um, Hello, Nuno. Got a captain in the house. Thanks for being here, Nuno. If you haven't seen Nuno's show, Nuno was on this show earlier this year, and he's the current record holder for the most popular, show. Basically, he deserves a air horn. Nuno's show. If you haven't seen it, we talk about Windows, the best way to do Windows containers, essentially. And if we go back in time, if we find that show, oops, under live, it was earlier this year. So this is the Nuno show, 290,000 views. That's awesome. So if you're on Windows and you're interested in some of the more advanced stuff, let me give you the better link. That's the link with the text in it. You don't want that. You don't want to start in the middle of the show. So go try that second link. If you're a Windows person and you want to know some more of the internals of WSL2, some Windows 11 stuff, how does WSL work with Docker? What's going on in the background? He covers a lot, and we get kind of nerdy. We go in pretty deep. So check that out. I haven't even liked my own show. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. I should have liked my own show. So yeah, go check that one out. That's our current record-holding show, 208,000 views. And the crazy thing about that one is that when it's an hour, almost 2 hour show, a view means that someone on YouTube has to watch it longer than a minute, right? I don't know what the actual algorithm is, but what you'll notice on these really long videos on YouTube is that it takes a lot of people to make one view, because the average view time on YouTube is like 7 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. It's not very long, but when you have the longer your show, the more time of it they have to watch in order to consider it a view. So I wouldn't be surprised if we looked at the stats that we found out that we had 500,000 people actually look at that video. They didn't look at it very long. They stayed for a couple of minutes, they hopped around, and then they left. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. Thanks for stopping by, Nuno. All right, so we've been online now for almost 90 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up. So give me any of your last minute questions. While you're talking to me on your last minute questions, I want to tell you what's coming up. So next week on the show, I am very excited. On the show, we are going to have, let me just pull all this stuff. We already have it listed, thanks to my wonderful team and my lovely wife. We already have next week's live stream ready to go. So we are having Brendan Burns, one of the co-founders of the Kubernetes project. He's a Microsoft VP, and he works in Azure. Like, his whole job is architecting Azure. He works with, I'm sure, other really smart people there like Mark Rosanovich. And we're going to get to have him on the show. So we're going to be discussing next week the future of containers, and anything goes. We have a list of things I'd love to talk about: WebAssembly, Azure, all the ways to run containers in Azure. What's next for Kubernetes? Are we going to see more abstractions, more layers on top? Maybe we'll talk about the Service Gateway API, or maybe, there's so many things we could talk about. Probably won't talk about Swarm, but I'll see if I can't throw in a question or two on Swarm. But it'll mostly be just on looking out and trying to figure out what we all need to be prepared for with containers. I think that WebAssembly is definitely going to be one of those things that in a few years we all might have. It might not be everything. I don't see every application running as WebAssembly, but in certain ways where it has definite advantages, especially when you need really, really fast runtime, where you are able to actually do things even possibly faster than native code, which is hard to imagine, but you can technically do it in Wasm. I think we're going to see that. So a lot of us may have to figure out ways to run WebAssembly in our clusters. So anyway, we're going to have that show next week. So be back here on Thursday next week to ask questions with Brendan. I haven't met him before in person, so I'm very excited to actually have a conversation with him. And we're going to have fun. All right. And then if you didn't know, right above me, that's our Discord server. I don't think I have Discord listed. Oh, here we go. So if you didn't know, we have a Discord server. We all hang out in Discord, and there's lots of people in there having conversations every day about Docker, Kubernetes. We have special channels for all the courses. We have my favorite channel, the memes channel, which is nothing but tech-related memes. Like Martin's got this is a classic. How to draw an owl. First create 2 circles, then draw the rest of the owl. Sometimes that's what it feels like to start in DevOps, right? It's like, how do I make a leap from learning Terraform to being a DevOps engineer? So this is my favorite channel, honestly. You could do this on Reddit, of course, but you can also do it here with the rest of us. So come check us out in Discord. We even list all of our events, so you can see the event details of what happens, and you can look at other events that are coming up, including if you become a member of this channel. So you can click subscribe. If you sign up for the $5 American plan, which is called the High Fivers, then you get to join us every month for essentially a coffee hangout in Discord. So those of us that are in, see this special Boosters member support channel. So we have a private channel there, and then we have audio video channel. And we all join every month. We talk about what we're working on. It's all professionals in the DevOps space. So if you're interested in that, you can either become a member here on YouTube or on my website or on Patreon, and you'll get the same benefits in all those different ways. So check that out. Lastly, I will just say it one more time. We are signing up everyone for the next big cohort of my new course, which is all taking place in Zoom, and it's all very custom. And I even talk with you before we do the course to make sure that I'm going to answer all your questions. So it's cheaper than consulting, more expensive than a Udemy course, but it's very custom, and you spend 9 hours with me in Zoom over the course of 2 weeks learning how to deploy to Kubernetes and how to automate your CI and CD. So check that out. I'll put that link in one more time, even though I've mentioned it twice already. And if you don't have time to do it now, but you're still interested, maybe you want to talk to your boss or get your whole team on board. The last time we did it, I had a team of like 4 or 5 people all join and do it together. And the goal is by the end of the 2 weeks, you're actually using these products in real projects. None of this learning over the course of months and then maybe sometime later this year using it. Like, I want you using these tools today. So we try to get you actually using them in your real projects by the end of the 2 weeks. And it's only an hour and a half every other day. So it's not a lot of time. You do get homework. You do get assignments. You do have prep work. You have to watch some videos, do some actual things. So it's completely custom, and I'm very excited about it. So we're doing that starting, I think it's July 10th. And if you can't make it this time, you can sign up to be on the wait list. So you'll get an email from me every so often that tells you when we're starting the next cohort sign up. And you can see here the schedule. And then if you have questions about the outline, basically, once you sign up for the, you can either email me or you can sign up on the wait list, and then you can reply to the wait list to get any of your questions answered. Yeah, it's all there. Martin's throwing some more good information about Java in there. Oh, interesting. Java 8 won't work on C Groups V2. And yeah, and not everything is using V2 yet. Like we still have older operating systems, but yeah, you definitely got to watch out for that, because I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't really checked recently, but I wouldn't be surprised if like V2 suddenly started showing up in a lot of these cloud installs. And yeah, and if you were using an older Java, then it just wouldn't work. Yeah. JavaScript is not Java. That's right. Summit, are any of these topics related to JavaScript? Sure. Which topics are you referring to? Sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but um, we talk about all languages here. So I'm equal opportunity languages. All right, people. Thanks so much for being on the stream with me today. Again, we'll be live next week with big guests, big announcements. Brendan's going to be on the show from Microsoft. We're going to talk about the future containers. So come back. You can already go to the channel and you can click that. So what I suggest right now, while you're on the end of the live stream, while I'm wrapping up, just go to bret.live or in a separate tab so you don't lose the stream. But I think that also in YouTube, if you're streaming, you can actually just back out or go to the main part of my channel, go down there and click notify me. That way you won't miss next week's episode. So that way if you're in work, you'll get a little bump, a little pop-up from YouTube saying on your phone or whatever that, hey, the show's now going live or whatever, or it's about to go live. It's the same time I always do my show on Thursdays at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And that show is next week. You can also, by the way, if you'll notice, down in the description, we now have a calendar for all these shows and who's going to be on them, because we plan our guests out weeks and months ahead of time. I think right now we have the next 3 months of guests booked. So if you want to know who's going to be on the show and which episodes you don't want to miss, I think if you go into one of these episodes and maybe look in the description, let's see if I can find it. Of course, this is going to be an example of where I don't have the link to the calendar. All right, we need to get that in there. We got to fix that. I thought it was in here, but it's not. It's in the email announcements that you get in the newsletter. And if you didn't know about the newsletter, you can scroll down in this show and click on bret.news, and that'll take you to the newsletter sign up. And then you get one email a week from me on all the things that I'm doing. Who's going to be on the show? Who was just on the podcast? What's next on the podcast? What courses have I created? What new free open source have I made? That's all in these past episodes. You get one a week. There might be a dog picture of my dog in there, and they tend to be very short, and they're just about what's happening in my content ecosystem. It's not a bunch of news or it's different than maybe what you're used to on it's not a news summary newsletter. Totally free. But yeah, sometimes I'll just rant on a topic, like I'm still learning Git 20 years later. So check out that newsletter. That's at bret.news. All the links are below except the calendar, which we'll fix that. But we do have now a calendar that you can basically add to your Google or add to your Outlook calendar or whatever you use. And that way you'll know each Thursday who the guest is going to be and when we go live. All right, everyone. Summit, sorry, we're ending the stream. Node.js, I'm a fan. I'll keep it at that. Keep using Node.js. I think it's great. I think that for new projects, I would probably prefer Go or Rust, probably Go. On a backend project, I'd probably use Golang. But there's nothing wrong with Node.js. It's a modern language and it keeps getting updates. So I don't have a reason to not use it. But if I was able to do everything myself, I'd probably use Go. And with that, thank you so much for being here. See you next week with Brendan Burns from Microsoft. We'll be here live on Thursday. Ciao.